Hi everyone, I'm Allie Buchman with the Potomac Bead Company, and I have the fun today of playing around with a brand new product that we just got in. We've been waiting impatiently for it to come in, and this is Deb Moffett-Hall's Endless Loom. So some of you may know Deb Moffett-Hall because she does tons of designs and beautiful, beautiful Christmas ball covers and different wrappings and all kinds of different patterns for those. Because of that, she decided to come up with this endless loom, which not only can be used for the Christmas ball wrappings, but also for other loom products. So this is just the box right here that it came in. I'll do basically a little unwrapping for you, and then also an actual project on the endless loom. So the endless loom has kind of all the details on it in the box, and it comes with some great instructions too. So the instructions are really great. It says what the loom includes. It includes the 2 bars, 3 pair of easement rods, 5 pair of sizing rods, 1 pair of sizing rods for an ornament, which an 8-inch is a standard ornament, but you always want to test your ornament if you're doing that. Non-latex elastic bands, and then a storage case. So just to show you a bunch of those things, I have the actual storage case here, and I'll open it for you. So this here is the storage case that the endless loom comes in. It's a little bit hard to see because it extends just a little bit further than the camera. But when you open up Deb's endless loom here, it has a nice little section to keep all of your belongings for your thread and for scissors if you want. And then it has basically all of these rods all extended out. So you can see there's the tension rod here. Let me flip it so you can actually read here. There is at the bottom here the little tension rods that show you exactly the different measurement of the tension rods, and I'll go over how to figure out what tension rods you want to use. The tension rods, here's the loom set up. The tension rods go in this little piece right here and basically keep your working surface nice and workable. So you'll take one of those out and put them in this section here. There's also these center bars or center brace bars on them, which is really cool too. It says what they're for. So in case you forget or in case you get them mixed up, here at the top, these are your spacer bars. So the spacer bars, again, it said you have those 5 sets of spacer bars. I have on my loom here the 7-inch set. You can also do 7 1/4, or I'm sorry, 7 1/2, 8-inch. Here's that 8-inch ball length. There's the 8 1/2, and then there's the 9-inch bracelet. The actual loom comes apart, and you remove those little spacer bars. The spacer bars get put in, and then inside the endless loom here, there's the 2 pieces of the loom, and you just put in whatever size you need. And in this case, it's a 7, and you snap those 2 ends shut. To keep them nice and shut, simple thing, you have that the kit comes with these stretchy rubber bands, and the stretchy rubber bands just get put along the ends to hold them on, although the fit is really good, so you don't actually need the stretchy rubber bands because the fit is really nice that this isn't moving and it's not going anywhere. But it's always nice to have that on as kind of a little safety. So it comes with the rubber bands, which get put on the ends once you have your actual spacer bar intact. The only thing that I would say that is kind of a bummer, but obviously I can make my own. I'm never going to use a size 9-inch bracelet. That's really large for me. And the 7 is too large for me. So I actually need something that's a little bit smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 7-inch rod here and cut it down. So that way it's going to cut down there 1/4 inch so I can make a 6 1/2-inch bracelet, so that way it fits on my tiny wrist. So that's kind of my only qualm about the sides of the spacer bars, is that I need one a little bit smaller. But the nice thing is it comes with a bigger one, so I can actually kind of just do some woodworking and get that down. This first row, this first kind of row here, or this first workout of the endless loom, Deb did put with hers, when I was talking with her, she said to kind of make sure that this is noted that you won't get this in your loom from us. This is something that she gives out to people about the loom. It's that it's natural wood, so it doesn't have any varnish, it doesn't have any coating on it, so it could kind of get marked up or gnawed up from some of your threads or some of your ribbons. So if you have a little piece of sandpaper here, and you can see it's just really thin, fine grit sandpaper, you can actually do some touch-ups. This you won't need to do once the new Endless Looms come out, but the first run that she got and the one that I got, it had that you want to kind of examine your tool or your loom here for the first time, place the paper towel on your work surface, and then you just gently sand off any rough feels that you feel because it is natural wood. I had to do very little of that. I did it just because it told me to, and I kind of played around with it, and it gave me a good use of the sandpaper. So that's kind of to the side, and that's something you may want to have handy. Like I said, I didn't really need it. The only place that I saw rough on the production was just a little bit on the corners, and that didn't really matter for me. But if you do want to pick up some sandpaper and do that, you can certainly do that. But I wanted to make sure I include that since Deb asked me to. So I have my little container here that I can then nicely close up and have my Endless Loom all together. And now I'm going to get in and actually do a project with you guys so you know how to set up the loom, how to pick everything, and then exactly what to use for what you're making. So again, I have my 7-inch length bracelet, which I'm assuming a majority of you will use the 7 or 7.5 inch. But the 7-inch bracelet here, I have those pegs in. And again, all I did was pry the piece apart, put the dowels in place, and then push them together. Before I did that, I put 2 rubber bands on the inside here of my loom. After that, you're going to secure it. It has just these little rubber bands that come with it. Obviously, they'll stretch out because they're rubber bands, but you get a pack of like 50 or 100 of them. And if you do think some are stretching, you can always put 2 on if you want to. But like I said, my loom is pretty brand new. I've only done 2 projects on it. And because of that, the fit is really great. But you can put those rubber bands on to hold those together. And then what goes in here to this rubber band is the tension rod. As you use the beads, it's going to increase kind of the space between the thread, and the bar is going to be a little bit bigger as you get started, and it's going to be smaller and fit tighter on your loom here as you build. So as you build on the loom, it's going to get actually the warp threads that kind of go through the middle are going to get tighter on your bar. Deb thought of the idea, which is great, to use little tension rods. So it's so simple. You just take your tension rod, and to know what tension rod you need to use, there's a little thing here that says exactly which tension rods you want to use for what actual size beads you're doing. So make sure when you do get it, I keep these instructions inside my little kit. That way you have it on hand in case you need it, or you can just watch this video. But I'm going to be using the medium tension rod bar, and that's because I'm going to be using 8/0 seed beads. I also use the medium tension rod bar for the design that I did here, which has a lot of different stuff going on, which of course I couldn't go easy first. I kind of had to play around with some bugles and crystals and demi rounds and 8s and cubes. So I went a little complex first. I'm going to go easy for you. If you do want to do the project, I'm using 3 different colors of 8/0 seed beads. So the 8/0 seed beads here, I'm using the white champagne luster, I'm using the matte opaque mauve AB, and the crystal Labrador. Any 3 will work. This is just an example of 3 different ones for you to see exactly how to set up the loom, how to do a simple pattern, and how to get started. So I'm using 8/0 seed beads, so I know that I want that medium rod. The medium rod gets put underneath those rubber bands here, and that is just going to basically hang out there and right on the end of the rod there. Now what I'm going to do is actually figure out exactly with the tension rod in how much thread I need. And I'm also going to do some starter pieces. So the way that this loom works is it's kind of different from other looms, and we're actually going to start by having our ends finished. So I did one end, and then I'll show you how to do that end as we do a second end. So I have that second end there that I'm going to create with my 5 rows, which is how long it's going to be, of my actual 8O seed beads. You can see here I use that matte opaque mauve color to do 2 rows of my seed beads. You can make the lengthwise colors like I did here, where I added my 2 rows here at the initial start place, and I did different beads, so it can really vary what you want to do, but I'll show you how to actually start the other end. The first end that you do, you're going to do a square stitch, and again the instructions are really nice for you, that it shows exactly kind of how to do that square stitch and get your starter row and exactly put your clasp on that one end, which I followed using 8/0s rather than the 6/0s as pictured. Now I get to do the other end. However, I don't finish off the other end completely. I'm going to have one warp thread. That warp thread is going to be basically how we attach this whole project and how we get our warp threads. So we're going to build in our second end here and keep one long attachment. To figure out how much thread I need to use to do so, I'm going to be using my endless loom. You will most likely have to add thread to your project, which I can show you how to do as we work on it. But to start, you're going to take your thread, and I happen to be using Wildfire .006 in the green color so you can see it a little bit. And you can use KO thread, you can use the Miyuki thread, you can use 1G, whatever you want to use. I know one of the concerns was that some of the threads can actually kind of make marks in the actual piece, but if you want, you have your sandpaper, doesn't really matter. What we're going to do is we're going to figure out how many beads wide we have. So I have 5 beads here that I'm working with, and you're going to wrap around that number of beads plus 1 more. That's going to be enough for your warp threads that are working on with your project. So I have 5 beads here, so I'm going to wrap around 6 times. So I hold my thread, wrap around my loom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I'm also then going to wrap around about 6 additional times, so that way I have enough thread to get my starter piece going in my first couple rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Sorry if I'm making a little nauseous there. I do have near me then my thread burner, and I'm going to burn the end of that thread off of my starter piece and get ready to add my needle. All that thread then is going to come off my endless loom. There. I'm going to take it all off and just pull it off to the side. Thread my needle, and we're going to get ready to do our starter piece. For the clasp that I'm using here, it's just a silver plated 2-strand bar clasp, and I'm using that to start. So if you do want to kind of work along with the actual project other than just learning how to use the loom, if you have a 2-strand bar clasp handy, that would be great. So I'm going to do this next step and actually carry with me my bead on it board as I go from this recording area to work on it to get that length and then record back. So to get the start here of the clasp, with the 2-hold bar clasps, you can, if you do have a pattern going on, you want to make sure to keep them together as you're working and creating. For me, it really wouldn't matter, but I'll keep it together. The first thing I'm going to do is actually just put on a stop bead onto this thread. I have my bead here. I'm going to put that down towards the end of the thread. The directions say to leave a 10-inch tail, because then you can go back and add your clasp on with that 10-inch tail. I'm going to actually do it all in one, so I'm not going to really worry about that tail. I'm going to leave just a little bit that I can knot it. Go in then and pull the thread through 2 times. And it's a fair amount of thread because remember we went through that loom the whole time, or around the loom as many times as we needed to. And I pull that and create a stop bead. So I'm going to end up doing a V pattern, but because I'm not exactly sure how many rows of beads I'm going to be using until I make one, I'm sure I could mathematically figure it out, but I'm just going to do 5 beads in the same color. So I'm going to do a row of 5 of my amethyst beads and let them all drop down to my stop bead. Once they're there, I'm going to square stitch on my second row. If you're unfamiliar with square stitch, you can watch, I have some square stitch videos also, but it's very simple. We're going to add a bead, take our thread and needle down the last bead towards the thread that's coming out, which is going to sit that 6th bead kind of right on top of that 5th bead there, and we're going to sew back through the 6th bead that we added. Give a nice tight pull and get rid of any of that extra thread. Now our thread and needle is coming out that 6th bead that we're added. We're going to add a 7th bead. So back through the 4th bead. So you're sewing back through whatever bead will be sitting right next to it. That'll kind of pop that 7th bead there in place. And sew back through the 7th bead. So basically adding a bead, sewing through the one that's next to it. You can see the loop there. Pull nice and tight. On goes another bead. Go through that 3rd bead. Then back out the 8th bead that was added. So after doing the same thing, you get your 10th bead added on there, and you have 2 rows there that are square stitched. This row is going to get connected to the other end of that bar clasp. To connect it back to the bar clasp, I'm going to take the thread and needle back through the first 2 starter beads. Exiting that 2nd bead, I'm going to add one of my champagne beads here. Sew through my 2-strand clasp. If you wanted to, you could also use a wire guard. There's a couple different ways to do this. I'm going to sew then back through that 2nd bead. What that's going to do is pull, back through the seed bead first, and then through the 2nd bead. So we're coming out of the 2nd bead, add in another 8-0, and then we're stringing back through that 2nd bead again. When I string through the 2nd bead, I'm sewing through in a circular motion, basically coming out the top, adding the bead back down, and then through. And what that's going to do is sit that bead so it's coming out right after that 2nd bead. I'm going to reinforce by again sewing through the 8-0 seed bead. And this is the same thing that I did on the other side. A little bit of a knot in here. Okay. So I'm going to sew through that 2nd, sorry about that knot there. So I'm sewing through that 2nd bead again, up through the 8-0, pulling it nice and tight. After you come out the 8-0, sew back through the loop again, one more time. Pull all that long thread through because you're going to have a long thread there. So back down that 8-0 seed bead again. This time I'm going to sew through beads 3 and 4 along that baseline. So we're sewing away from the stop bead. Give a nice tight pull, and that's going to get 2 strands of thread holding the end on. This is the exact same way that I did the opposite end. When you're coming out here through the 4th bead, put on an 8-0 champagne, sew through the end of the clasp, pulling all the thread through, sew back through the champagne bead, back through bead number 4 towards the opposite end of the stop bead. So basically you're just circling that thread so that way that 8-0 seed bead sits right on top of that 4th bead. Again, then I'm going to go through the champagne bead, take all that thread through, go through the clasp, and back through then that 4th bead there towards the end. At the same time, I'm going to go through that 5th row The thread is kind of twisted around here. And once I go through that 5th bead, that's going to bring my thread and needle out right along the end of the project. Once I'm out the end of the project here, what I want to do is actually get back to my starter row. So my starter thread. So I'm going to take it down the whole row there of that 2nd starter row. So this is a little bit different than the instructions that Deb has, but my thread is now exiting. I'm going to keep the stop bead on rather than tying it off, because then I will, actually I'll go ahead and tie it off. I'll show you how to do that. So remove that 8/0 seed bead and then tie those 2 thread ends together. This is also how we're going to add some thread. So I'm tying right over left and then left over right. And then my thread end that's long, I'm simply going to take my burner, burn it down. I'll leave it stick up there just a little bit, so that way I know where it is and I can burn it off later. Because of the nature of where I put the knot, I'm going to simply sew through my 1st row one more time, basically circling around. And then I'm going to sew through my 2nd row one more time. So this seems like when I did the first bracelet, I felt like I was working on this piece forever. But the nice thing is, once I'm done with this piece, I'm done with the bracelet once I get all my beads on. So I don't have my extra rows to thread on. So I have my thread and needle coming out this side of my clasp here. So this is my long piece again that we measured around the loom, and we have that ready to go. Now I'm going to show you actually how to get the warp thread set up and how to grab our loom and work with that. All right, so I already showed you how to set up your loom and how to assemble it. Now I'm going to show you how to do the warp threads and add those onto it. I have my little starter section here and one of my tension rods right in the middle there of one of my brace sides. I'm going to put the tension rod almost to act as a stopper and my actual clasp piece there going off basically to the middle. The first almost like 2 ends will stick off the actual loom towards the center of the loom, and then that tension rod will be right below that 2nd starter line. I'm then going to wrap the thread around the loom, and I'm going to go underneath the loom, and we are going to grab on to bead number 1 basically on the opposite side, sewing from the outside towards the inside of the project. I'm going to have my first warp thread. You can see that first thread there going the whole way around the project. And you want it to pull it tight, but you don't want it too tight. You can do that as you continue to kind of add your next warp threads. To add the next warp thread, I'm going to go under the loom to the left of the first one. And when I come out this thread here on the starter side, I'm going to sew between beads 2 and 3. So I'm sewing just between beads 2, and I want my needle to come out between beads 2 and 3. Pull all that thread here. And when I started and did my first one, I had like 7 rows, so it took a lot longer to get it set up. But once you're set up, you go quickly. Now that you have that second little starter piece in, thread goes backwards again, back to the opposite side here, and I'm going to be sewing on this opposite side. I already have thread coming out between beads 1 and 2, so I'm going to go and sew through bead 3, so I have thread between beads 2 and 3, and then once I sew through 2 and 3, or between 2 and 3 rather, and pull that nice and tight and get that warp thread in position, I'm going to reverse the thread, bringing it back down, and that's going to put another thread there coming out between beads 3 and 4. Pick up the loom, come over to the opposite side here to that little starter piece, and I'm going to sew between beads 3 and 4 and have my needle exit them between beads 4 and 5. And I forgot to mention, I am using just a size 10 beading needle Pull that nice and tight. And I think it's easier to keep those warp threads if you can in order, because you can really see exactly where they're going. This is going to be my next time around here. And I'm going around the base of the actual loom, coming over to the other side. I'm going to sew through bead 5 on this other side and come out right along the end. When I come out along the end, that is my last time sewing through beads on this side. But I still need to bring the thread to the opposite end to create my final warp thread right along the side. So my thread comes around the base and again wraps underneath and right around then to the top. So we are ready here to put in our last warp thread. And the last warp thread is actually coming off the side of the last bead here, bead 5, on my actual starter side. When I go through bead 5, I'm going to go the whole way through that second row. If you need to, you can also move it a little bit up so you're in your working surface here. And my needle and thread are going to come right off the edge. That's going to bring that last warp thread in place. And now I'm going to use this opportunity to really pull my thread tight, get my warp threads in right next to one another, and get rid of any extra thread. I now get to actually start my working surface. And for my working surface, you're actually going to move now the entire project kind of up to the opposite end of your loom. So you're going to slide it back here. If you want to, you can keep that tension rod in. It's up to you. You can slide it out. Deb also suggests that you can go to the next size down. So I could go to the thinner tension rod. But now the fun begins. I get to actually start my looming project. So you can see my warp threads here. And I'm going to have 6 warp threads because you're always going to have one more than the number of beads that you're doing. And I'm going to go in and actually start my bead work. So I'm going to bring my beads here off my bead on it board and just down onto the bead mat a little bit here. And to start the actual process, I'm going to be starting a V pattern because I'm working with 3 different beads. So to start my V pattern, I'm going to pick up 5 beads because that's how many beads there are in my row here. I'm going to pick up a silver on the outside, then one of my champagnes, purple, champagne, and silver. Drop those the whole way down your thread. And what we're actually going to do is take our needle and thread under all of the warp threads here to the opposite side. And I'm going to use my left hand, because that's not my dominant hand, to kind of massage those beads right up in place. What that's going to do is force those warp threads really far down along the bead line. And then I'm going to use my needle and thread to come back through that whole line. When I'm coming back through this whole line of beads, I'm going to make sure that my needle and thread go above those warp lines. When I let go then, my beads are in place. So you can see how quickly that was, not having to square stitch them all in place. Again, because I want to do that V pattern, I'm going to show you how to do a pattern. I'm going to start with whatever bead was in the middle. So that was my purple bead. I'm going to start with the purple, and then I'm going to my silver, and then my beige, there, that champagne, silver, then purple. Again, let those drop down, go underneath the loom, let them drop the whole way over. The bigger your beads are, the heavier they'll be, so the more easily kind of they'll drop in there. Go back then, take your needle, kind of massage those beads up, take your needle and thread right underneath. And I apologize, I know it's a tiny working surface here, but I want to make sure that you guys get as much detail as you can. So you can see that champagne bead is now in the V. What I'm going to do is my second row is always going to start with that, or my next row is always going to start with that middle color. So it starts with the champagne, and then it's going to go to that second color, which is the purple, then the middle color, and then reverse it. So the purple and the champagne. Again, bring that into the middle. Drop those beads around these, drop those beads underneath here. Push them up with the fingers. And you can see then that first V of the silver beads. Once you have them up and popped up, you're going to make sure, again, the most important thing when looming is that your needle goes above those warp threads. The bigger the hole, the easier too. If you've never done looming before, you may want to start out actually working with 6/0 seed beads. Again, as I do my next row, my outer one is going to be whatever is in the middle. So that's my silver. And then my next one is going to be the champagne on the outside. Then my purple. Then my champagne. And my silver. Drop those down on the loom. Underneath, kind of massage those into place to get my purple V there. And then I'm going to show you how I do it as I turn the loom to the side and pull them all up. You can see I have a little break in there. Don't worry about that. You can move it up on your loom, move it up into place, and then just give a little tight little tug. As you work on the project and you're running out of space, if you have a bigger wrist, you'll have a bigger space, obviously, because you'll have bigger dowels in between. But you can just kind of rotate, take that tension bar down if you want, change it up. I can rotate it, now put that tension bar back in so I have it, and then go in to do my next row. So the tension bar really keeps it nice and tight. I'll do a couple more rows, and then I'll actually switch out to a less of a tension rod, so that way my thread's not quite as tight along, because it will start to get tighter as I add more beads. So again, just to show that pattern, the outside color is going to be whatever is in the middle. Then the next color is whatever's on the outside. And then that champagne peak for the middle. And then you reverse it. So the silver and then the amethyst. Drop those all down underneath the loom. Push them up into place. You can see that V action now happening. Take my needle the whole way through, all those beads, making sure that I'm above the warp thread. And pulling. Give it a tight little pull, and then I'm on to the next one. So it's really simple once you get started to actually keep going with the loom. The example that I made before, just to kind of bring that and show that, the example that I had before, my warp threads were not positioned exactly spaced evenly like here, because I used a bigger bead in the middle. So when I used the bigger bead here in the middle, I did them as the warp threads here that I had, one on either side of the cube. And then I did a collection here, just to give you an idea, of the demi-round, 8/0 demi-round. That was all in between one warp thread. Then my Potomac crystal, then the 12mm check bugles, and then reversed that order. So that way I had a nice line kind of going down the middle and had that whole project that I worked on using this same technique as we're doing now, just with different beads. So the cool thing about a loom is you really can use a variety of different beads as you're working with it. And there's a lot of different patterns out there for it. And I'm sure as this endless loom kind of blows up, that you'll see a lot more patterns coming out that you can do in the loom pattern. You can always also create your own as well. I'm going to keep going and creating more on my actual bracelet, so that way I can show you guys as we create kind of how to move it, how to switch the tension rods, and then also how to, when we get to the other end, how to do the clasp. So just to show you as I'm working with my loom here and the project is going, you can see that V pattern going on with those beads. And I have a little bit left to do. I've got about 2 inches left to do, and I am out of thread. I also wanted to show you that I've decided to switch to a smaller tension bar. And to do that, because it was getting tight on that, I simply slid the smaller bar in, and I just have the smaller one, or the bigger one, just kind of hanging out there. If you want to, you could remove it too. But as you move the beads and you have your working area, you just simply slide that tension bar down, move your project to wherever you need to that open space so you can work with it, and then slide that tension bar back up. And there I have it, ready to go. I am to the point though where I need to add thread, so I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to take another piece of thread, and not nearly as long as last time because I don't have as far to go. And I'm going to take the two ends here, taking my needle off, take my new piece of thread and tie it in a knot around my old piece. Pull that knot nice and tight. Then slide that knot by holding the original thread, slide that knot down right next to my project. Give it another nice tight pull, slide it down one more time, and then simply tie the thread ends together. As I tie the thread ends together then, I want to give it another pull. And then I'm simply going to attach a needle to my new thread and burn these down a little bit, not actually burning them down completely until I am done and ready to kind of finish off my bracelet. So now I'm just going to go in, add a needle to my new thread here, trim these down, and then continue on with my weave. So I'm right at the end of my loom bracelet here, and I'm showing you the end, and actually that I've moved the tension bars completely down so they're not on the actual portion of the loom anymore. And I am going to take my last one and put it on and show you that there may be a little bit of extra room when you're done. You don't want to squeeze an extra row in there because what that's going to do is create some bubbling effect. You don't want any bubbling effect or bunching effect to go on. So what you actually want to do is remove it from the loom, let it rest a little bit, and then weave some of those threads back in. To remove it from the loom, all I'm going to do is move those rubber bands just kind of off to the side there on this one end and slide my bracelet off. So it is really cool that now that you're done the loom portion, you're actually finished. I'm not going to let it sit for an hour because of video and time wise, but I'm going to show you how to finish it off. So Deb does suggest, because the thread can stretch a little bit while you're working with it, depending on what you're doing, to let it sit a little bit and then let it sit for about an hour and then go in and actually finish it off. I'm just going to finish it off right here at this end. So just like you would a normal bracelet, I have my thread and needle, and I'm going to go back through the entire row 2. That's going to connect a little bit tighter that last row and this first one. I'm also going to go back through row 1. So I'm just zigzagging back along the end here, going through 1 and 2. And then I'm going to sew down into it a couple times, reversing, going back through 2, going back through 3, going back through 4. And then I'm going to start to pop out between some of the rows. Catch one of the warp threads underneath. Make a loop underneath one of those warp threads. Sew your needle through that loop. Pull nice and tight. If you have a nice small bead, that knot then, when you sew through the next bead in line, will just kind of disappear into the project and you won't see it. Again, I'll go back another row. You will see an extra kind of line of thread on the side, so you don't have to go back through the whole thing. But I'm going to go back here again, pull it out after one of my beads, grab underneath one of the warp threads, go through that knot that the loop that I just made, create a knot, sewer's knot there, and go through the next bead. Pulling the thread out then between some random beads here at the middle, a couple row back. I'm going to take my thread burner, burn that thread down, and then where it's popping out right there, just a little bit, just burn it down, balling it up a tiny bit. And it'll just kind of disappear into there. Also going back to that starting end here, if you want to, you can glue a little bit. I'm just going to simply get that thread end knotted down there. Any connection points that you have too, you can go in and actually burn those thread edges down. If you want to and you want to hide that knot more, I'm not really concerned about it, but if you would want to hide the knot more, you could also have left the needle on and pull it back through. For time purposes, I'm not really worrying about it. Kind of push that in there then, and you can push that knot just really back into one of your projects so you don't even see it right along your bracelet. At this point then, the cool thing, like I said, it takes a little bit of time to set up, but you are finished. And just to show you a 7-inch on my wrist, it kind of drowns me a little bit. So it does have a little bit of a longer wrist action going on if you do have a tiny wrist. But the nice thing is, actually, it's a piece then that will fit most other people, which is nice because I tend to use and do small projects. So again, for the project, all I used were 8 OC beads and then that 2-strand clasp. The cool thing with the loom is you can really use any size, and Deb does a great job with those tension rods, explaining what tension rod you would use for what. So I did the same distance here for this looming project that I did, and then took it off the loom, waited a little bit, and then connected the ends just like I did the other fashion. So don't limit yourself to just 8 OC beads. You can really mix up sizes. You're going to see more threads interior wise. You're going to see some of those warp threads going through if there is a big size difference in your beads. That's why you can see some of that thread in between the crystals here. But it's fun if you use a nice color like the green and you're using green beads, excuse me, you won't really see it. So you can see the difference in just the different beads that you make, but the process is the exact same that you're working with. It's been really fun to kind of get to play with the actual endless loom here that I picked up from Deb, and now we have a bunch available for you guys too. So check out Deb's Endless Loom if you get a chance to play with it. I'm actually really excited to make a Christmas ball out of it too, Christmas ball cover. And if you do want to make something like that that doesn't have a clasp, she has nice instructions in it for how you actually do it without a clasp, and basically join the 2 ends together with just another little stitch if you want to. There's also other instructions and instructional videos here for doing wrap bracelets. So there's other uses for it than just your standard loom bracelet. You can go ahead and do wraps. You can do the Christmas ball covers and all that fun stuff too that allows you to play with this endless loom. Again, if you need the loom, you're more than welcome to purchase it from me online at PotomacBeads.com. You can also check out the loom and all the great things that we have there. You can also subscribe to this YouTube channel if you like getting new updates about new products like this endless loom, new examples about how to create products, different patterns as well. You can always subscribe to this YouTube page. You can also join us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page as well as a Facebook group for beading and jewelry making, and there you can interact with other people that have a passion for jewelry making. There are some great artists there that make wire working and seed beading, and everything looks so easy and so fun and really kind of is addicting to look at everybody's pictures, help answer their questions, and it's just a really great interactive forum for interacting with other bead makers and bead artists. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and as always, have fun playing around with Deb Moffett-Hall's Fun Endless Loom.